Bul Armory is one of, if not the best value 2011s going. The quality was already insanely high and it improved coming into 2025 by getting rid of the rest of the MIM parts they were using. And the Blaze is now the flagship gun for the limited optics division. So what makes it better than the TAC? How's it different from its predecessor, the Air? Everyone gushes over these things and what's wrong with them, and I'll tell you. Welcome back to the channel. I'm David, and this is the Bul Armory Blaze. Now, the Blaze is one of Bul's competition guns, and you know that to be true because it features the gray grip and the stainless slides. That's what they've been doing on their other competition guns. That's the Air, and they have the Spitfire as well, all of which are silver. When they're serious use guns, typically rock the black coating because that's what ninjas like. This particular competition gun is intended for limited optics division or limited in USPSA, as it does come with an iron sight for the rear. And for our across the sea friends shooting an IPSC, that's going to be standard division or standard optics. I don't even know if they've gotten that approved yet. But when it does come, this would be a gun for that. Now, my IDPA bros are like, hey, does that work for IDPA? And out of the box, no, it does not, because the magwell is too wide. The magwell is built around the standard box for IPSC competition. However, the safeties are just barely wide enough to make the box for IDPA. So in theory, you just swap the magwell and you've got a gun that can flex into both. So obviously, since it's a competition gun, we're looking at it through the lens of a competition shooter, which I happen to be one of. I've been competing with Bul Armory guns for about the past 5 years, and I've got a lot of rounds downrange through Bul Armory guns. And as luck would have it, just this past weekend, I completed a major match with the Bul Armory Blaze. I've only got a handful of training sessions and that one major so far, but I'm liking what I'm seeing so far, and I'll tell you about it now. And before we start comparing it to the other guns, I'm gonna run through kind of what the features are, and then we'll talk about how it compares to Air, the TAC, and then we'll hit the downsides on the way out of here. So what is the Blaze? Well, first, the Spitfire, I've got a video on my channel about the Spitfire, but effectively what they did is they took the bottom section of the Spitfire. If you see the frame kind of coming back right here, on this one you can see the frame mount right there for the thumb rest and optic. It's got the gray grip and the steel mainspring housing as you see there, but this has a tungsten magwell. The Blaze is basically that same lower, except for they drill and tap both sides of the frames now. It's got the same mainspring housing. It's got a different magwell. It's not the tungsten magwell. So in hand, the Blaze is going to be basically identical to the Spitfire with the exception of the safeties. The Spitfire has these massive shielded safeties, which is what you want for an open gun because they get a lot of slide velocity. Whereas these guns, you're not going to be getting quite as much slide velocity based on the ammo you're shooting, but the shielded safeties are a huge win. And that's the first place that I want to talk about is the shielded safeties are, in my opinion, the best safeties for a competition 2011. Why do I say that? Well, I'll just show you on the TAC. If you look on the TAC right here, where you can kind of read TAC Pro in white, that's not supposed to be white. What that is the skin from my thumb from making superficial contact with the slide, how I grip. And before we move on from that, there's only one way to grip a 19-2011, and that is with your thumb on the safety. That is not open for discussion. Do not fold your thumb underneath the safety. You're asking for trouble. But what I noticed is that when I shot the IDPA match back at the end of March, just in the match, because the gun was clean going into the match, I put up a lot of dead skin into the writing on the slide. And similarly, the other weekend, I was shooting the Air, my old limited optics gun in the Christian Seiler class. And I mean, I got a nice haze of my dead skin on the slide as well. The shielded safety gives me a little shield to press into that doesn't keep my thumb from getting onto the slide and slowing the slide down. So what that means is as the oil starts to run out of the gun or evaporate, me digging into the slide is less likely to make the slide stop moving. That is a common malfunction for 2011s when they run out of lube, as the shooter's thumb can sometimes slow down the slide and cause feeding malfunctions. Sometimes the feeding malfunctions are just the shooter's grip putting pressure on the slide. And this particular pair of safeties does get my thumb a little bit higher up. You can see how my thumb lands on the safety there in the pocket for my support hand versus the Air. When I get on there, the pocket's just a little bit smaller with how I can build it. It's not a big difference, but Bul Armory Air, my old competition gun. The Blaze, I can already tell you, I love the shielded safeties. They're way better. I think because the geometry of how the grip tang is done on the two guns,
You don't have the memory bump. It feels like I'm getting a little bit higher on the blaze. I don't think it's making a ton of difference, but I do know that the shielded safety is keeping my thumb off the slide, which is something I get into with 2011s that don't have shielded safeties. So I definitely appreciate the fact that it's got shielded safeties. I do like the sculpt of the back strap. It's kind of like the Spitfire in that regard. So I do say that I prefer the ergonomics of this. It's not a huge difference, but it is a difference.
The grip that comes on a Bul Armory gun, it's not quite as fat feeling in the hand as a traditional 2011 grip. It almost feels more like a 1911, but it's not as thin as a 1911. It just kind of feels more elongated oval and less kind of like fat oval, if that makes sense. I think smaller handed shooters typically would prefer the feel of a Bul grip versus the traditional fatter 2011 style grips. The other thing that's cool about the Bul Armory guns is you can see kind of the trigger right there. It has a modular trigger shoe that kind of slots in there. It's retained by the over travel screw. And if you back out the over travel screw, you can actually swap out the profile and length of the trigger shoe at your house rather than going to a gunsmith or buying a $60 trigger or something like that. So that is pretty cool. So that's a good design by Bul. And the trigger on the Blaze is just an excellent competition trigger. You can see just a little bit of pre-travel getting onto a very firm wall and then just a hair of over travel as it goes through. It's set up safely so that it's providing the shooter enough feedback to realize when they're getting to the wall, and then they're giving them enough over travel where you're not likely to induce, bumps or anything like that. It is a very good trigger setup out of the box on the Blaze. Since the gun kind of hits that sweet spot for a 9mm uncompensated pistol of about 40 ounces, the gun is just absolutely tame to shoot. It is it's a pussycat in hand, and because it is a 5-inch 2011, I actually prefer the 115s and the pop that they provide. I feel like they give better slide velocity for that big chunk of steel moving back and forth. So I kind of favor the 5-inch 2011s for 115s. If you start talking about 124s or, higher grain weights, getting shorter slides kind of makes sense. But for 115s, it's just a match made in heaven for the 5-inch guns. Now, the accuracy out of these guns is worthy of discussion. So when I first got started with the gun, I was shooting my Buffalo Creek 115s, which is a great range load, and this might help you if you're curious to learn more about that.
All right, I do need to show you this because I'm still zeroing the gun, but at about 12 yards or so, when I'm getting a rough zero, it did this for me. That's 3 shots confirming zero. You can see I've still got some right and down to do, but not bad. Walking back on this zero, that's from 20 yards.
I was really impressed with the accuracy out of the pistol. I mean, I probably shouldn't have been because honestly, the air does the exact same thing. But when I took it with my fancy new pistol rest, because I'm a fancy man with an indoor gun range membership and a pistol rest, I rested some groups off this thing. And what I can tell you is that the group size is constrained only by my vision and my ability to aim it rather than the mechanical accuracy. You can see that about 5 or 6 of the holes are touching at 25 yards, whereas everything else was likely due to vision. So how is it different from the air? Well, it doesn't really matter because you can't get an air anymore, but for you guys who still have airs, you're probably curious about how the Blaze is an upgrade. Well, first and foremost, the Blaze has the new BAO optics mounting system. If you see how the optic is basically flush with the back of the slide, whereas there's, a millimeter or 2 of it being pushed forward. This is still a pretty darn good optic system, but you're still mounting the optic into a plate, then mounting the plate into the slide. The BAO optic system actually sinks the optic down lower, and it's using a spacer plate. The spacer plate only provides the recoil lugs that go up into the optic. There's a strong male-female connection between the plate and the slide, and then the screws are threaded directly into the slide. Like the plate thins out where the screw holes come up, so there's almost no screws passing through the spacer plate. And the spacer plates come with the gun. The Blaze comes with 4 optic plates. It comes with Delta Point Pro, RMR, RMS, and even RTS. So it can do pretty much any of the competition optics. The next obvious difference is the barrel on the Air stands proud of the end of the slide, whereas it's cut flush with the end of the slide on the Blaze. That's just kind of an aesthetic thing. It doesn't really change anything. You can also see that the ports on the front of the slide go further forward on the blaze than they do the air. That doesn't that's not really functional, because, you know, when you're racking the slide, you're not going all the way to the tip. You're generally grabbing about right there, and it's got them where it counts. So that's not a huge upgrade. The big difference is going to be the grip safety on the blaze is different from the traditional grip safety on the air. It makes me feel like I can get just a little bit higher. You don't have the memory bump to contend with. The mainspring housing similarly is steel versus the polymer one on the air. The safeties, as we talked about, are, you know, these are the tool steel ones with the shield, and these are the old MIM ones. These have been fine. I don't know how many rounds is through this gun, but they've been absolutely fine. But I do prefer the shielded safeties on the blaze. And the only other difference between the air is the drilled and tapped holes on the frame. So if I wanted to put a thumb rest on it, I could. Now, dropping back and comparing it to the TAC. Now, this is a TAC Pro with the holes, but we're gonna pretend that those extra holes are not there and just presume we're talking about the base model. There's about a $500 delta to go up to this gun. So I know a lot of you guys who are weighing the purchase in your mind are like, why is this $500 better? And the answer is really the creature comforts that make competition easier are already on this gun, where this gun is going to require, you know, upgrades. So what do I mean by that? First and foremost, the blaze, because it doesn't have pick rail slots cut out, is heavier. Like, this is material heavier, holding them side by side. You can see all of the weight that's relieved at the front of the frame with the milled rail, and then just the pick slots coming all the way up the dust cover, whereas this is just a big honking piece of steel. That's going to be a little bit nicer shooting for competition traditionally. You've got the bigger magwell on this, whereas the TAC has their TAC magwell, which is smaller. It's also not as comfortable. It's very kind of geometric, and it just kind of pokes me in the base of my palm. It's not uncomfortable, I just prefer the other magwell. But if you're thinking about USPSA competition, the magwell is an easy thing to make a swap if you are interested. The other thing is that the slide cuts at the front of the gun for manipulating the slide on the blaze, they come just a little bit further back, giving you a little bit more real estate for high-speed manipulation. Not saying that the TAC ones are bad. In fact, they're excellent. They're some of my favorite. The safeties on the TAC are much, much smaller. They're, you know, something, this is a duty use gun, and, you know, the safeties are trim for like a duty use profile. And another thing is, while the mag release is sort of drilled and tapped, there's no button that comes on the gun, and that's something you would typically like for competition. Similarly, there's less weight in the back of the gun. It's not a huge amount of weight, but the mainspring housing is polymer versus the steel on the blaze. The blaze is also fit a little bit tighter. The slide to frame fit is just, I mean, there's a very slight amount of wiggle, almost none. Whereas my TAC, which does have more rounds, but because of the coating, the tolerance is a little bit wider, and the coating thins out over time. So as you shoot coated guns, the tolerance tends to open up, and you can hear the rock right there on my TAC. That's still a very tight gun. So don't hear that and think that's a really sloppy. No, it's a very tight gun. It's just, it's even tighter with the blaze. And the biggest difference between the TAC and the blaze is going to be, while this has the same BAO optic cut, the rear sight is behind the optic, because this one's mission is to have backup irons. It's a hard used pistol. So the optic sits right in front of the ejection port, whereas this optic is all the way at the back of the slide. I never have to clean this optic in the course of a match. This optic I do have to clean, because it gets little sooty spots on it, as like right there, there's still one from the last match I shot on it that I haven't wiped off yet. This one is going to get the optic lens smoked much faster. It's a quality of life thing. It's not a big deal, because just keeping a lens wipe in your back pocket during the match and wiping off the optic as it needs it is not a big deal. I do it all the time. But, you know, it is nicer to not have to clean the optic. Like, I shot a whole match with this, and the only smudges on the glass is from my thumbprint from touching it like an idiot. And just kind of a superficial difference, the trigger is going to be set up a little bit nicer for competition than the trigger on the TAC, but the difference is so slight it's not even worth talking about, but it's there. So is there a $500 delta between the two guns? If you've already got one of these and you're happy with it, then probably not, unless you need another gun to shoot matches with. I would say that I would prefer the blaze to the TAC for specifically competition shooting. For carrying and duty stuff, the tack just makes more sense, and it's more of a jack of all trades gun where it can flex into the competition space, but because it is a little bit lighter, it's a little bit better balanced, and that's subjective. I like a gun that's more neutrally balanced, which this is. The Blaze is a little bit more front end heavy, as you would imagine. So the tack is still a brilliant gun, but you know, you have to be the judge as to whether that pricing offset is going to be worth it to you. Now let's talk about the downsides to the Bul Armory guns. Now the first downside is going to be something that affects all the Bul Armory guns, and that is that they're available pretty much exclusively off their website. So you will not get to put one of these in your hand before you lay down your credit card information and they show up to you. At this point, Bul, I feel like, is an established brand. 5 years ago, perhaps that wasn't the case. I have several Bul Armory guns, as you've seen, and they're all fantastic. I haven't really had any issues with them, but I know some of you guys, this is a big, you know, investment and you want to get it in your hands to check it out yourself. The other downside is because these guns are popular and they don't do back orders, what ends up happening is they come in stock, they immediately go out of stock. So actually just getting a gun, even when you've got the money burning a hole in your pocket, is a challenge. Signing up for their mailing list to be notified when they come back in stock is the best way to figure it out. The next one is that this gun is specifically a limited optics gun, whereas they're made in Israel, so they kind of are in the IPSC market, not the USPSA market. So the magazines that ship with the gun, and you get 4 of them, by the way, they're excellent mags. These are 126 millimeter magazines that hold 20 rounds and lock back the slide on empty. They're excellent magazines at an excellent price point. I don't remember the price on this specific one, but the 20 round mags are basically the same length as every other 2011 style mag that holds 17. So that's actually really cool. They don't have the big base pad at the bottom either. And while that's a really good magazine, that's not the style of magazine that we're going to want to compete with in USPSA. This is 126 millimeters with 20 rounds out of the box. They also sell 140 millimeter length tubes. This is one of the Bul Armory 140 millimeter length tubes, but that only gets 22 rounds with a lockback follower. If you want the Terran Tactical 3 millimeter base pad and then like a Graham spring and follower, will get you kind of where you want to be on capacity just for competition. But at that point, you've spent MBX magazine money. MBX magazines for the 140s for the Bul Armory guns are about 130 bucks, which is a very expensive magazine. However, they are fantastic. It is honestly my recommendation. Even if you're shooting other 2011 guns for competing, I would say get a set of 140 millimeter magazines from MBX and just compete with those. Use these for training. So in theory, you know, you get 4 magazines, they're great for training, but for competition, I would recommend getting the MBX magazines. And finally, talking about the Blaze relative to the Staccato, because that is a comparison that comes up every time Bul Armory gets mentioned. With the TAC series of gun, there's enough daylight between the price tag on the TAC and the Staccato that the Bul just wins hands down. It comes with 3 optic plates. It comes with 4 magazines that are all 20 rounders, versus the Staccato, which is like $300 more and comes with 0 optic plates and 2 magazines. This makes sense all day long. While this is about a $200 premium to the Staccato P, I mean, honestly, it still makes sense. It starts to become more of a question, but for sport purposes, I definitely would pick the Blaze. The grip texture is just a little bit better. The trigger is much nicer out of the box. The shielded safeties are great to have. And I mean, the gun is just fantastic. However, there is the question of warranty. The Bul Armory guns come with a 1-year warranty, whereas the Staccatos come with a lifetime warranty with absolute white glove service. I have never had to warranty a gun at Bul Armory. Because it's a 2011 style pistol, when something goes wrong on it, I just take care of it myself because they're relatively simple to work on. But on a Staccato recently, I did have a warranty claim. They overnighted it from my house to their factory and back to me. It was gone from me a total of 3 days. They called me as soon as the gun showed up and they received it. Like, the service on the Staccato warranty is off the charts, and it's for the lifetime of the pistol. Bul Armory only gives you a 1-year pistol. I don't know if it's white glove service because I've never had to use it. But kind of like an AR, there's probably a qualified 1911 Smith in your area who can take care of it for you. In the rare instance something from the factory comes wrong, if you get a part that has like a bad heat treat so it breaks or something like that, that's probably going to happen in the first year of ownership, and they can take care of that for you. But once the gun is set up and running, like they just run, dude. The parts really aren't going to break. The only thing that tends to go wrong on 2011 pistols is that the ambi safeties will typically break after a lot of dry fire and shooting. I broke a set of these safeties on my first Ultimate Racer that I competed with. It took nearly 3 years for that to happen. So they got a lot of use out of it before I broke it. And that's like a significant amount of, that's probably 20 to 25,000 rounds of live fire plus a ton of dry fire. And that happens on all 2011 safeties. Now that safety part was not a Bul Armory part. They were using a different vendor at the time. So ambi safeties do tend to go with a ton of use. It's not unique to this gun. It's all 2011s. It's just how the part's designed. I guess I should just wrap it up because I'm probably not going to do a follow-up for this. I've already shot one major match with this gun. I am going to shoot 4 more this spring, and I have 1 in the fall, and I'm planning on shooting it at Nationals this year as well. It is going to replace my Air as my go-to limited optics gun. This is now my backup gun. They're close enough to be the same, but at the same time, I just prefer the Blaze to it. If you want to watch this gun in action, you can see all my match footage on my B channel, The Arrogant Marksman. That's where all of the match footage is going to be. All the match video you saw in this is over there as a complete match with a really awesome power metal track. It's the AI generation on the power metal is excellent. If something goes wrong or breaks, yes, I will give you an update video, but I'm probably not going to do like an end of the year update. What's going to happen at the end of the year with this gun is I'm going to clean it. I'm going to replace the recoil spring. I'm going to get new springs for my MBX mags that I compete with, and I'm going to put it in the safe and wait for next year to roll around. Like that's what's happened on all of the Bul Armory guns so far. They've just been very boring in that regard. So they're excellent, excellent pistols. I still think that the Bul Armory guns are the absolute sweet spot with what you're getting versus what you're paying for. Just the level of fit, like this is a very tightly fit gun. And my Air, which is similarly on the same program, like this one has, I don't know how many thousand rounds. It's less than 10, but it's more than 3 or 4. And the slide to frame fit is still excellent on this gun. So they're really, really great guns. If you have questions, you know, shout out in the comments or whatever, and I'm happy to get to them. Now, I forgot to say, this was sent to me for review by Bul, so there you go. I'm trying to be as transparent as I can be with the thing, but if you've got questions, let me know. And if you want more information on the TAC, you can watch this video here.